You are listening to Something Rather Than Nothing. Creator and host, Ken Vellante. Editor and producer, Peter Bauer.
Hey everybody, this is Ken Vellante with Something Rather Than Nothing, and have a guest, writer Ross McMeekin, and I've recently read the collection Below the Falls. Really enjoyed it, Ross. First of all, thank you. You do a bunch of things around writing, but before we jumped on here, I told you I was really interested in that you edited a literary journal called Spartan, and I told you, like, I was just wondering, like, what is that? I've read a lot of journals, I've been in academics, and I love the high thought that's involved with it, and kind of being in cutting edge and writing and thought. But you're the editor. Like, what? Tell us about it.
Yeah, it's a great world. There's kind of a world of literary journals and indie lit, and I almost think of it, if you're into music, like indie labels. They're small, Spartan's small. Yeah. It's me and my buddy. It's a passion project. We've been doing it now for 12 years. And we specialize in really short fiction, 1,000 words or less, 500 words or less, even less than that. And it's kind of like, it's a passion project, and we try to just publish what we like, and the style is more minimalist. But as far as the bigger, larger world, there's journals that publish long stuff, short stuff, experimental stuff, language driven, more surrealist. There's just a whole pocket. There's these little pockets of literary journals of people like me who are just, like a certain type of writing and want to put it out there and want to provide like a space for people who aren't necessarily writing like for New York publishing and aren't necessarily writing New Yorker stories, and have those big, nothing against those, of course, but like there's stories and forms and ways to write them that are maybe not going to fit into the mainstream. And so literary journals like Spartan kind of exist in that in-between space, where we love literature, but we love, forms like flash fiction or microfiction that don't necessarily have as much of an audience beyond a lot of times beyond writers themselves. And so there's a cool community, not just of writers, and but of editors too. We write and we submit to each other's journals, and it's kind of a community sort of type thing. So yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for dropping into that. One of the cool parts of the show, I would say, recently, is that I've come in contact with a lot of writers, and that's been throughout the show from the beginning. Poets, spoken word writers, novelists. Kind of documentary books, a lot of poets. So it's always been there. And I've had more lately. And one of the things, my brain intellectually, I was trained in philosophy and English lit. So I kind of like, it's all the same for me, kind of. I kind of move like in between them. But it's been really good to kind of like re-engage, and in particular with the short story and the shorter forms of fiction, and that you had mentioned. And I'm quickly learning about it because I've been out of contact with it for a bit. I wanted to ask you about the shorter. My brain thinks in these shorter patterns. I've been an English lit major. I've read, Warren, I've read, the classics and War and Peace and Faulkner and, massive novels. But the way my brain thinks is much more along the lines of these vignettes. I've always struggled with like kind of permission of writing short things. Like I always feel it has to be bigger in my head. Could you dig into a bit to the shorter type of fiction and stuff that's out there that people might not see, or flash fiction and different type of experimental forms? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, I think flash fiction, it's been around because it hasn't. I don't think it got called flash fiction until maybe 20 years ago. But people were writing short stories, or it'd be Hemingway, another one, Raymond Carver, were writing these stories that were 4 pages long, forever, So, but it kind of got a little definition around it, and I think it being online also began to provide a space because articles got shorter once everything got published online, and fiction was no exception to that. So I think that helped it come about. But also, I'm with you where, for me, I mean, in my book, there's a lot of really short stories, some that are just a paragraph long, and it's like, are they stories? Are they flash fiction? Are they prose poetry? There's all these sort of blended lines between them, within the forms. But I think for me, there's something that I'm really drawn to as well, because, there are the bigger forms. Like you said, there's the War and Peace. There's, Anthony Doerr, All the Light We Cannot See, these big sweeping epics, but sometimes, if you got a crystallized little bit, a couple paragraphs can touch on something that's deep and that's profound, and a story just kind of, I love it when flash fiction, when the story just kind of opens up at the end, and then you read it a few more times and you can see the layers of meaning, and it's a little bit denser. There's a little bit more of this puzzle to it at times, where it's like put together in such a tight way that there's almost I don't know. It just feels thicker in some ways. It's not as sprawling, and I guess I really like that about the short forms.
Yeah. Thanks for that. I got, like I said, I read a new collection, Below the Falls. A beautiful cover, everybody, by the way. You won't be able to see it. This is an audio program, but outside of the content, too, what a nice volume. It's nice to have a nice volume, Below the Falls by Ross McMeekin. Ross, tell us about the new collection.
Well, it's a collection of stories from, like I said, one paragraph to about 15 pages. And it was written over a course of 15 years. I started the title story 15 years ago. And some of the stories are, at the time of publication were maybe a year old, and some of them are much older. And they go through a lot of different variations, where some of them are surrealist, some of them are almost fables, some of them are traditional, third person short stories, like you might see in a collection that was being taught at school. Like when I was in school, I'm an English lit major too, so when I was there, and
we're the best. We're the best.
Yes.
Hidden secret. We're English literature. We're the best. But go ahead.
Yeah. And, so there's more of the traditional New Yorker stories, and there's a few kind of attempts at that, but it's just kind of all over the map in terms of stylistically. One of my friends who was in my writing group, Jody Poloni, who's a writer as well, she took a look at it, and she'd been workshopping these with me over that 15 years. And she read the whole collection. She's like, man, you're all over the map as far as your writing, And I think the collection, that's one of the strengths of the collection, because, you have a linked story collection, that's linked with multiple characters that kind of recur, or it's got a scene. Yep. It's like, in the exact same spot, Winesburg, Ohio is a classic example of that, where it's around a small town.
Yes.
It's a classic. And Sherwood Anderson. Yeah, for sure.
Great collection.
And, so you've got those ones that are tightly linked in that sort of way, or even like linked in style, and you think about a Raymond Carver collection he's got such a distinct style that he brings to all of his stories, but then this is kind of, 15 years, I went through different phases, and I got really into like Ben Laurie, who was writing more of these sort of almost fables, like that were almost like, at times that you could approach them like children's stories, they felt like that, but then they go in crazy directions, and all this meaning opens up. So I went through different phases of what I was writing. I think it all kind of came in there when I was collecting it into a short story collection. Trying to think about, like, how is this thing put together, so I decided I knew I wanted that first story to be the title story of the collection. And then I just intuitively kind of went one by one and said, what feels like the story to come next, and then instead of trying to tie it together with theme, with, these, logical ways, I was like, I'm going to intuitively put this together and kind of see what happens. And so that's what it ended up being. It kind of like veers this way and that, different settings, location, styles. And so,
it fit my brain. I could say that for me individually as a reader, it fit my brain. Let's kick around a couple conceptual questions here. What is art, Ross? What is art?
Wow. I would say it's an expression, but it's also a recognition. Like for me, I think that art, like it is an expression that kind of comes out of my singular experience as a human being, but it's a recognition also of a reality that's beyond mine, both with other individuals and just with the universe itself, everything that's involved, all the relationships. So I think it's an experience for me, but it's a recognition. And that's as a writer, like for myself, as I'm creating, I feel like those are those two forces where I'm recognizing what's outside, but I'm expressing what's inside. But I think art, I don't know if I have any huge philosophical definitions as far as what is art, if I could encapsulate it. But it's one of those things. This is going to sound terrible, but I'm just going to say it. Like it's subjective, but it's not. It's like, it when you see it, but you don't. There's this there's this sense of mystery around it. And I think when I see or I read something and it peeks into that sort of mystery of life and reality, and there's this sense of meaning, even if the meaning isn't logical, but there's almost the meaning of the experience. Like you see something or you read something and there's the experience of meaning, even if you don't know what it means. That experience, I think art brings us into that place where we're thrust into a reality, and maybe we feel it if we don't understand it, but it's there. So I don't know. That's a rambling way to say it, but that's kind of.
Oh, I like there was something even in particular when you said, you know it when you see it, and it always makes me giggle because it's an actual strong concept that's been used to describe things. There's a famous Supreme Court decision about pornography, and it was you know it when you see it was the conclusion, where we ended up. And so it's actually a strong legal or conceptual thing to have, it when you see it. And for me, it feels like that with art too. Sometimes it's when you can't quite explain the rest of it, but you're that's art, man. Look at that, and it's
that's it, right?
Component of it. I'm showing you it. And I wanted to ask you the role of art, or maybe what it does for us. I asked this question lately in this day and age. We say we record in 2024. Is art have the same role that it has had, or is there something different about what we need from art?
I think for me, as I see it, one of the things that I think in my life that I've been going through is going through a period of maybe a decade where I was really interested in defining things, like trying to define, reality, what something rather than nothing. I'm trying to define something, and I think what art does is it brings us to things without definition. It brings us to a place that doesn't have a logical sort of rational sort of definition for me. And I think that's huge with our culture right now, because I think our culture is obsessed with defining everything. I think there's this sense of we need to sum it up. We need to take everything and put it into this thing, and we draw it out. That's what it is. And I think when we get to go into someplace undefinable, someplace mysterious, art can take us into that. And it's countercultural in that way, I think. So I think it's needed even more so. And I think perhaps in the past, especially when you get past more, when you really get into the distant past, conjecture for me, it felt like there was, when I read old writing, there was more room for that mystery. There was less that was known. There was less of this overarching idea of definition, and there was more of a greater room for mystery that I think is needed now, but isn't as present. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite fair. I ran into the type of thing when I'm interviewing. Sometimes when I'm engaged in the conversation, I'm drawn right in, and I'm like, wait a second, I gotta still run this interview. No, thanks for your thanks for your thoughts. Really appreciate it. Let's crank out one more, the big one, since we're on a roll here, and then we'll kick around a little bit more about writing, the something rather than nothing question. Why do you think there's something rather than nothing?
Um, I I I do think that, and it's one still that intuitive thing that I'm learning to trust more. It's like a feeling thing. It's like a grasping thing out there. I haven't always thought this, you know. I think one way to think about it is so I touched on this before, but like in my life, I grew up in a home that wasn't religious at all, and we didn't really think about the somethings like that. Just wasn't talked about, you know. And I just,
Yeah.
you know, when I started getting into my late teens, that's when I started being really interested in something, and I started really going after it and trying to provide definitions for it. What is this something? What's the nature of a God? What's the nature of the universe? What's the nature of humanity? And over the last 5 years or so, I've kind of retreated back a little bit from those definitions, and to allow myself to say there is something, and I believe that, but I'm less willing to define it, if that makes sense. Like I'm cool to sit with that lack of definition and say there is something. I believe that intuitively, you know. I couldn't argue for it, you know, like, and be like, let me prove to you that there's something, but like I feel like there is, and what that is not quite defined, you know, not nearly as defined as when I was in my late teens and 20s. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you. And I think there's something about that too in the kind of going in. There's this instinct of going in and being like, you know, wanting to understand everything. I think when maybe I was younger too, like this drive of like trying to answer these questions. And then for me, even doing this show, you know, there's an absurdity underneath it for me because like I'm not like I'm not like close to the answers. I enjoy the process of trying to get at these as
Yeah.
it's a prompt, you know, like I it's not like despite all my guests and all the wonderful thoughts of everything, it's not like I have a greater understanding of like the scope of the question, but I'm not quite like I haven't answered the why is there something rather than nothing. So there's a spoiler, everybody. It keeps on going. We keep on recording. This is a little bit of a standard question, but Ross, I mean, you mentioned some other short story writers and their impact. What for you as far as the shorter fiction form? Which writers really did it for you to kind of work in that realm?
Yeah, I think I really fell in love with the short story at the end of high school. I had a great English teacher, like a lot of people talk about. They have that English teacher that's like
Yeah.
talks to you, speaks to you, you know. And we read Sonny's Blues by James Baldwin, and then
Hell
we
yeah.
read Metamorphosis by Kafka, which though it's a
Of course.
novella, it's on the shorter end, and it
Yeah.
just blew my mind, man. And then going into college, I started getting into Flannery O'Connor, reading her stuff. I mentioned Raymond Carver,
Yeah.
who's, you know, Pacific Northwest, you know, and so I felt like that connection, but really it was, you know, going to grad school and starting to read writers like Amy Hempel. If you know, she writes very short stuff as well. And part of it's the time that I was in grad school is, you know, read her. Alice Munro is another example. You know, she just passed away, which is just tragic. She's an unbelievable short story writer.
Yeah.
Rick Bass,
Yeah.
Montana writer. You know, I'd love to write about the outdoors. So, you know, if someone like Rick Bass can do that like no one else. And then, you know, coming into the the kind of literary community, indie lit community, I started to get into flash fiction writers. Like Tommy Dean is one of those guys who's putting out great books. Amy Barnes as well, flash fiction writer. Both of those folks I came to because they submitted to Spartan, my literary journal, and I was like, oh man, I like what you're
Yeah,
doing. They came out with a
it
book.
happens, right? Just like the podcast, like
Yeah.
you
And
get
then
to
you get
learn as
into
you
it
go
and you're
along.
like, yeah. So that's kind of the, you know, now I get a chance to see a lot of writing, you know, and Jules Archer, you know, people submit stuff to Spartan. I'll just get introduced to these great writers who are doing short stuff. So yeah, it's been fun to kind of see that just kind of over the years, kind of get introduced to more and more writers and, you know, be able to read them in a bigger context, to see what people are doing within that greater short story context.
I really like that. I wanted to ask you kind of it's an indulgent question for me, but I have had a propensity to write, and I love writing. And what I would say, I always want I hope to develop to be able to write more deliberately, whether it's short stories or longer form myself. And I do a ton of shorter writing and advocacy in my work as a labor representative, like during the day. And I know I'm a really good writer. Like, I mean, people tell me that all the time as far as conveying, arguing, persuasion, things like that.
Yeah.
And so I know I've developed that and honed that type of argument. Um, but I have difficulty having done that for most of those productive hours for me, my brain to switch to again write, but in a completely different way. Do you have like an idea? Like I said, it's a bit self-indulgent, but I mean, do you have an idea when folks do expend a lot of energy and thought in structured writing, but kind of want to open it up a bit more and not just fit into those muscles that are back in the day job?
Totally. Yeah, no, I think, yeah, for me, it's, I think like like for better or for worse, I write usually from 2 to 5 in the morning. And that's kind of like not the best time to get up and do stuff, but or anything. It's the best time to sleep. But finding that space, like it's the quiet, the quiet space where there's just, you can disengage is not the word, but there's space to do it. And that's for 2 to 5 in the morning. If you can find, for me, find a time that you're basically able to push that sort of stuff away and turn on this
All of that,
imaginary
right?
thing, and for me,
All of that.
like, yeah. So like from 2 to 5 in the morning, I have no responsibilities, and so for me, that's when I can kind of go into the places that have less to do with my to-do list, less to do with the stuff I got to do. And like you said, the writing that I just, by nature of what I have to do is just there, I just have to, versus like this place that's going, I'm going to explore the outer reaches of imagination as best I can, even if it's only 1 inch into that outer range, I'm going to go there. Yeah. So.
Yeah. No, that's helpful, and I know a lot of it. I think it's funny because I've had conversations with folks about writing, or maybe even on the show, and sometimes like I actively forget the amount that I do. That's very developed and artful and technical and that type of thing, because it's like that part's not automatic. You always have to think, but it's become, I've developed some really good habits of being able to analyze in that way. And then
Yeah.
on the other side of my brain is like, what does that planet billions of light years away from here in this science fiction story look like when you approach it? Like,
Yeah, totally.
Like, and like that's way out there, and you want to go there.
Yeah.
You want to go there in writing. You're in the Pacific Northwest,
Yeah.
right? I'm an East Coast person. I grew up in Rhode Island, and kind of industrial city, Pawtucket, Rhode Island. But I went to the school at the University of Rhode Island on the ocean. I've always been impacted by the place that I live. I lived in the Midwest in Wisconsin, and I've been in the Pacific Northwest for about 13 years. And this place really has an impact. Like the place itself, for me, has a real impact on me as far as the environment, stretches of raininess on the west part of the Cascades. It has a feel and a mood and a culture and all that unto itself. That's for me. I was wondering, for you, does it have those same kind of carryover impacts? Because maybe I was feeling some of that within yours, but I don't want to read too much into it either.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. I mean, I've lived in the Pacific Northwest. I spent 4 years in like the Los Angeles area, but other than that, I've been in the Seattle area my entire life, born and raised there. And it does. I think it's just, it feels like it's captured me in a way. It's interesting because I think I, I grew up in the city, like in Seattle proper. So I didn't grow up, there weren't trees around, like the stereotypical, like this lush forest and this trees and all that sort of stuff. I was in the city,
Yeah.
but then I was introduced by my mother. She took me up. I still remember there's this alpine lake that was up I-90, and you could just hike. It was like 5 miles up, but you couldn't drive there. And when I was like
Yeah.
13 years old, she took me there. And, this was before Instagram. This is like, if you didn't have a picture of an alpine lake unless you had a book, or a magazine or something. And she took me up to this alpine lake, and it absolutely blew my mind, changed my life, where I became a city boy, but it's like, that's where I wanted to go. And I feel like I've towed the line between that being a city guy born and raised, but like I wanted, we've moved out of the city, and it's like, I want to be in places that are more, for lack of a better word, wild, populated by trees and populated by that sense of landscape, that sense of grandeur. Also for me, living in the trees right now, it's like there's this sense, especially come fall, things get darker. There's this sense of sadness. It's raining all the time. There's a little bit of melancholy that, honestly suits me, and I feel like comes out in the collection as well. That's kind of, my, a place for me. And I think that the Pacific Northwest has that sort of feel to it, that LA had a very different feel to it, whereas Pacific Northwest has this vibe that I think is captured even by the color tones. You've just got the greens, you coming over from I-90 from Eastern Washington, which is much more, the Palouse, it's much more plains. It's much more, rocky outcrops. It's not, then you come up I-90 and you start hitting the mountains, and you get into the pines, and then you get into the evergreens, and there's just this whole other color palette that just kind of, you almost have to take a deep breath, or at least I do.
Like Wizard of Oz, like it goes to color, and it's like, whoa!
Yeah,
of course, not during the fall to winter to spring, but that it would open up. I loved your description there, not to just jump in, but the color palette, and thanks for answering that question, because it's an odd question, but I think when you think about place and impact, and I can be sensitive to my environments, and like I was really feeling what you were talking about, because I grew up in old manufacturing city out in Rhode Island, Milltown, and but I'm out here now, and it's different lands, it's different. Everything's different out here, and I'm just saying, it doesn't feel the same for me in my sensitivity, but in a very in a way where I come from outsider eyes, with outsider eyes a little bit, and I have the same experience as folks. When you're talking about a bit of the melancholic, or the comfort in that, it's in a certain sense going to be cloudy, and sometimes the sun will pop out, but it's a comfort as well. It's not just like a sadness, not getting into like clinical or anything like that, but it's a comfort to folks of reliability or something, or a blanket around that time, or maybe resting if you have the opportunity to rest some more, the natural calendar. It's a feeling, it's a vibe, and it's real, and I'm still figuring it out. It is from where I'm from, they call it Oregon. But when I first got to Oregon, and being out in Eastern Oregon, you see some of the same topographies, of course, up north in Eastern Washington, the Western Washington is described. I was like, when I got to Eastern Oregon, like, I'm from Rhode Island. I'm like, what? This is Oregon? I was so confused. Like, I had no context to understand that this was Oregon. It was 2/3 of Oregon in the land, and high desert, the topographies, the isolation, and sparsely populated counties. And I'm like, Oh, I didn't see everything I needed to see on the TV about the
Yeah.
Pacific Northwest. Fascinating. I was blown away when I experienced that.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, people don't know about it because Pacific Northwest, you think, like we talked about, you think evergreens, rain, clouds,
Yeah.
rivers, that sort of thing. You go to the Palouse, and it's like you're on a different planet. I love the Palouse, the sweeping, hills, and just different, again, different color palette. It doesn't you if you took a picture, no one's going to be like, oh yeah, Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, that's right. It's quite an enjoyable piece of it, and and one of the things, final point about kind of place and thinking about it, with the ocean out east, the ocean, I got used to and swam in the Atlantic Ocean. Got used to what an ocean to me was the Atlantic Ocean. You could swim in it for certain months. It was warmer than this Pacific Ocean. When I got out here, I'm like ready to jump in the water. I'm like, hey, water, you can swim. And people are like, no, 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 no. You're too far north. And I'm like, what? Water, swim. And they're like, no, you have to go much further into California
Yeah, yeah.
swim in the water. So it's like a whole different relationship. And I was struck by the ruggedness of some of how the forest ends, and then it's just the ocean right there that you'll see along 101 going along the Oregon and Washington coast, where for me, being a flatlander, the ocean state out east, everything just kind of morphs into, okay, now here's the ocean, where out here on the coast it's like forest, done, ocean, and it's like very, very powerful and to be respected. The waters and the land, it's the opposite, it feels to me, and rugged and enjoyable, but very, very distinct and different for me.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, we go. My family goes down to the Oregon coast once a year, and it's totally like that, in the sense of, and also up in the Olympic Peninsula. I don't know if you've been up there, where you're at
Yeah.
trees. These windblown trees are just kind of like scraggly up on a cliff that's going down. The waves are just crashing into it. There's great white sharks down there. That this it just feels, yeah, when you put on your wetsuit, it's like you've got a hood, you've got booties, and you're still freezing. It's just a much more severe, maybe would be a word. It feels like it's a
That
severe
feels right.
representation of the ocean and kind of the wild parts of it. So
That feels right. And also too, I respected the ocean out and then the Atlantic, but it's a whole different piece out here when you're around the Pacific Ocean, at least on the Oregon coast, of safety, not turning your back to the ocean, having in front of you, keeping an eye on things, riptides, undertow, matters where you are, what you call them, but
yeah,
all those type of things where I was quickly anointed with that. And it's just a respect. It's a respect, and it's a powerful, powerful force. And I think folks out here, not to be too, cautious about everything, but it's good to be safe in those rugged environments, taught me really quickly to be like, respect all of this around here, because,
yeah,
height and conditions. And so I do love it out here. And thanks, Russ, for indulging me. I'm always trying to dig in more to understand. Hey, Ross, I wanted to make sure we get this in here about where we can get your books, where we find you, the journal. How do folks interact with what you do and create in the journal?
sure. Yeah, the journals, spartanlit.com, and you can see we've got all the issues that back till 2011, 2012. I think it's 2012. So that's easy to find. My writing, got my website, rossmcmeekin.com, and I've got some links to short stories that I've written. But you can, as far as the book goes, it's available at bookstores. It's available on online retailers. If it's not, they have it in some bookstores around here in the Seattle area. But even if you go to a bookstore and you're around the country, it's you could say, hey, can I check this out, and they'll be able to order it for you. So there's definitely ways to get it, which is awesome. Or you can get it straight through the publisher as well. So that's kind of how you can do that. Find the stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, 30 West Publishing, and
Yes.
like I said, a book is a total thing if you have it in the physical form. But really, really enjoyed your writing, and this volume as a whole. And part that you were just speaking about that I liked was how it moved about. It fit my brain, like I said early on, as far as like moving through it, but also beautiful cover art, a nice volume thing. So when you're a book lover, it's important to mention those details. Below the Falls by Ross McMeekin. Ross, it's been a great pleasure to be able to talk to you about writing the Pacific Northwest. Some of the big questions. I had one more question, just maybe a little bit more indulgent too, before letting you go. You mentioned some authors' names, as we were talking. On the Pacific Northwest tip, could you maybe mention an author or two that you really find to be important or incisive from the Pacific Northwest that you've interacted with, an author or two?
Yeah, I'd say a couple authors I really dig. One is Peter Mountford. He's a Seattle author, and I was able to work with him a little bit, and he writes fantastic work, and he's a local guy that's definitely worth checking out. I think another. I know I'm saying I'm a kind of a Raymond Carver fanatic, so I'll say check out some of Raymond Carver's work. He's a Pacific Northwest guy born in Yakima. And then
Absolutely.
yeah. So there's a couple authors. Another guy, Robert P.K. He's lesser known. He's published but you can look him up. Robert P. K. He's published a lot of stuff in literary journals. Hasn't published a book. I'm trying to get him to like publish a book. He's not interested. He's one of those type of writers. He just wants to write. He's not as much like sending his stuff out, but you can hear his stuff online, and he's much more almost on the science fiction sort of vibe, but it's Pacific Northwest.
Like
yeah. So Robert P.K. is worth checking out.
I tell you, one of the most amazing parts in the Pacific Northwest, I'm a comic book guy, graphic novelist, arts, and I could not believe the amount of illustrators. I mean, it's, in Portland, in Seattle. Wow. Culturally, artists and writers. I'm an East Coast guy. I was far away. I never knew. And I'm always just like amazed in just like the talent and things that I really like too in writing. Like I said, comics, graphic novels, just really, really enjoy that. And thanks for mentioning those authors. And folks, we'll put some links to those and exploring a little bit more some of the great art produced out of Pacific Northwest. Ross, thanks so much for coming on to the show and chat. And I've appreciate your exploring all these areas with me and for your writing, which I highly recommend to listeners.
Great. Thank you so much. My pleasure. Great to talk with you. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. Have a great day.
Yeah, you too.
This is Something Rather Than Nothing.
And listeners, to stay connected with us and our guests, visit somethingratherthannothing.com. Join our mailing list for exclusive updates and access to guest-created art. If you enjoyed this episode or any episode, please like, subscribe, and leave a review on your podcast platform. People really read that shit. Your support helps us reach more listeners and spread our community across the planet. This is a global show, and we like to give a shout out to our many listeners across the world, including many listeners in Canada, Spain, Germany, UK, Argentina, Brazil, India, Thailand, and so many more places. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Something Rather Than Nothing Podcast for behind the scenes content. And the best way to help the show is to tell your friends about us. If you love it, they'll love it too. Tell your friends who love it. We love you. This is Something Rather Than Nothing Podcast.